Clear to engage. Time on target. 5 mics. Out.
Welcome back to Crosstabs with up-and-coming political strategist Bryan Iverson and everyone's favorite Nepo baby, Reagan Knope. If there's something happening in the world of politics, Crosstabs, we're talking about it. How are you doing today, Bryan?
Well, since I'm up and coming, better than old and almost out the door. Thanks, though. I'll take it. I'm
Yeah,
great.
absolutely.
It's a good day to be in the office doing some recording. A lot of news happening out there in the world, in Oregon politics. I mean, obviously the national stuff. It feels like they gave us the weekend off from the national, which was kind of nice. But
Finally.
yeah, but I don't think we're seeing the end of what's going on there. But yeah, things are good. Things are plugging away, except for half of Oregon on fire. But outside of that, it feels like we're in the midst of a nice warm rest of our summer.
It does seem like, because we had a couple of years ago where the fires were pretty bad in the valley and in the Santiam Canyon, obviously. We had that devastating fire, and I honestly can't remember the names of them because there's been so many. But then I was just reading from a staff person sent me a text update. They were on one of the fire calls today, I think that the governor was hosting, and we're over 1 million acres burned now. And this seems like this is the year it's bad in eastern and Central Oregon is kind of what I'm hearing, and so I really feel for everybody out there. I-84 has been closed at various points, might still be closed. Highway 20 was closed for a while as you're going east of Bend. It's really bad out there, so we hope everybody's staying safe, praying for rain and for all the firefighters that are out there. There's firefighters from multiple states, here in Oregon and Washington.
Yeah, it's there's a great app called Watch Duty. I don't know if you have it on your phone, but it's great. Like it's got all of the fires in the whole West Coast, and it's really you can kind of zoom out and you can just see where everything's burning, and
Wow.
it looks like most. And there's my little blue dot, and everything east of me in Prineville is literally on fire. It looks like from east all the way up to northeast and into Idaho and stuff. And there's just some massive fires. We have some range ground up in the Ochocos. Luckily, we don't have any cows up there, but it's basically an evacuation. I would have nothing to evacuate because it's just trees. So I don't think I could take them with me out of there. And if I could, the Forest Service has a problem with it anyways, even though it's our ground. I don't know why I need a permit to do that, but a lot of places, like you said, are just on fire, and my heart goes out to those guys, especially out there in the Durkee fire over there on 94 that you were talking about, 288,000 acres. So there's a huge effort. I know Vicky has been in contact with a lot of the folks with the Cattlemen's Association and other groups out there to start hauling hay to the folks out there because they lost all their summer ground, if you think about it. So a lot of their cows, like while they're in the valley floor, they're all raising hay, putting water on you. Well, you can't have your cows on there when you want to raise the hay because they eat the hay. So
Right.
usually, hopefully a lot of them got allotments or they got summer ground, and that's all gone. So they probably got hay they got from their first cuttings or what have you, but the reality is it may not be as huge of a deal now, but they're going to need it come this winter because they're not going to be able to have any hay storage. So yeah, we'll see where this all falls out, but it definitely is a bad fire year for us over here, no doubt. I hope it just doesn't get worse drought wise over in the valley and the coastline, and that place starts lighting up, because when Portland starts to burn, or you people over in the valley that have no idea what you're doing, things become a shit show in a real hurry. So
There's a lot of grass. Lynn County is the grass seed capital of the world, and I think grass does burn. So there's always concern.
Yeah.
And it's so green over here that when stuff does get hot and light up, I mean it's hard to stop the fires. So
Yep.
well, I hesitate to do a fire related transition, so we're just gonna say that's the end of that
Speaking
conversation.
of fire,
Start a new
LCD and Bynum.
conversation.
That's right. See,
Speaking of fire, that's very dangerous for people. There will be a fiery debate. That's
Yeah.
could be dangerous for a candidate, I guess. See, Brian, that's what I didn't want to do. It seems insensitive.
I don't think so. Everybody's got
Uh,
a sense of humor.
Oregon Capitol Chronicle, although I'm reading this on OPB because they let them republish it. Oregon Representative Congresswoman Lori Chavez Dreamer has agreed to 4 TV debates with her challenger Janelle Bynum. So earlier this year, after she won the primary, Janelle Bynum challenged her to 3 debates. She wanted a Portland TV station, a Bend TV station, and a live streamed debate hosted by print or radio because Democrats are all about inclusivity. And Lori Chavez Dreamer just said, why don't we just do all the TV stations? Central Oregon Daily, KTVZ, KTU, and Coin. So that's what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I think one thing that was interesting about this article is the only side that commented was Chavez Dreamer's side. They didn't get a comment back from Bynum because they said, we look forward to hearing Janelle Bynum apologize for solidifying Measure 110. I was like, ooh, spicy. But they didn't get a response from Bynum on that. So maybe she didn't want to respond to her contributions to Measure 110. I don't know.
Well, I'm glad to see debates. I mean, I like debates. I mean, hopefully it's more of a debate than a true like forum. Because I think the forums just suck. I mean, you and I have been to probably more political forums than we know what to do with. And they just like, oh, this person gets to speak for 30 seconds or a minute and answer. And, and it's just filled with your friends and your enemies. There's nobody undecided in those things. So the TV angle definitely gives a better reach. So, you could reach people that you may not, reach otherwise that would show up at an in-person debate. But I just hope that they're moderated well. I do think it's kind of funny that KGW didn't get in on that. It was Coin and KATU. I wonder what went on behind the scenes on that one. So I bet Pat Doris is flipping right now that he didn't get his claws into that one. So
So many things I could say about Pat Doris that I'm not going to say.
I saw Lori debate a couple of times last cycle, and she had the primary and she debated during that, and then she debated in the general with McLeod Skinner, and I think she did a pretty good job. And I have to say, I don't think I've ever seen Bynum do a debate. I don't think she's ever had to. Heck, her last House campaign where she spent $1.2 million, she didn't even put her name in her TV ads. All she did was attack her opponent. So I'll be curious to see that debate. I'm looking forward to it. I think it's great that they're doing them. I think that's freaking democracy in action, and I think it's fun, and that's a great idea. 2 in Bend and 2 over there. You guys in Lynn County though, because you get Eugene media, don't you? In Lynn
Yeah.
County, you get both. Does he get both? Like you get
Some we can get. I think we can get Portland and Eugene. Here's where I say, Brian, I don't have cable. I've only had cable one time, and it was at my apartment in Medford where it was provided for free. So I really couldn't tell you because I've never watched local news really. But I think we mostly are Portland, but we get a lot of Eugene radio. I think that's what it is.
Well, I know both of these candidates, and I will throw down for us, Reagan, that Crosstabs is willing to host a debate between the two of you live on X, and we could do it.
We'll even figure out how to stream it, Brian. Yeah, X. That's a good.
Great, and then we'd reach everybody, and there wouldn't be a geographical spin on these debates. We could really get into the weeds with stuff. So if Representative Bynum or Congresswoman Chavez Dreamer, if their teams want to reach out, Reagan and I'd be more than happy to host that debate.
Absolutely. The other thing that happened related to the 5th Congressional District race, as these quarterly filings come out from the FEC, there were some late ads that McLeod Skinner and Bynum both ran away from really fast that were attacking Jamie McLeod Skinner. And the reason they were nervous is because the media buying firm was often affiliated with Republicans. And so the Republicans were meddling, Brian. Now, Democrats would never do this, meddle in numerous primaries to try to get the worst candidate out of their opponent's primary. Oh, wait, they do that constantly, especially in the U.S. Senate. They're always trying to back
Yeah.
the most radical candidate.
Wow. Yeah, I thought
So,
that was pretty funny seeing that.
right, Winning for Women Action Fund, which is a group that I think was started by Elise Stefanik, if I remember correctly, Winning for Women. And their goal was basically just to elect more Republican women. Very good goal, very good group.
Yeah.
But anyway, they checked 500,000 in right there at the end. Didn't help Jamie McLeod Skinner not get blown out. I think it was a little bit too little, too late. They would have needed to start that earlier, probably would be my guess for it to have an impact.
That's I mean, $500,000 is no joke though. I mean, that was, it's a decent little chunk. I like the group. I think the group has got a great purpose, and some of the nefarious activities like these ones, I don't think I mean, $500,000, like to your point, wasn't gonna move the needle. So I wonder if there was maybe a reason why they wanted to do it beyond the fact that they knew they weren't going to win. I don't know. I sometimes wonder if there's different reasons why they choose to get involved in some of these things on kind of like a low level dollar amount. Because unlike CD3, when everybody just came in hammer throwing, going that we're moving Maxine Dexter forward, it was like, people were throwing kitchen sinks out the airplane to make sure that they were hitting the right target, and this one just, it's just not a bunch of money, whereas you had $5-6 million being thrown at Maxine Dexter in the last weeks of that campaign. So there you knew everybody was going for it. But yeah, well, we'll see. Maybe they'll come in. Maybe it's they're saying to Chavez Dreamer, maybe they were trying to work on something with her and said, we'll come in and help you, and we're going to be there for the general. You always kind of wonder what the motives are.
Yep. Real time follow up. Elevate PAC is the group started by Elise Stefanik. Winning for Women is a different group. And I'm not sure who founded, but on their board of directors website, they have Barbara Comstock, who I think is a former congresswoman, if I
She is.
remember correctly. So some heavy hitters
Yeah.
weighing in. It's always cool when these national group. I mean, for me as a like a political person, it's just cool when any national group takes notice of Oregon, because we're just out here with our 6 congressional districts and our 8 electoral votes and all that stuff. And so when the Republican national groups get involved and all that stuff, I just think it's cool politically.
It's just been this weird blue-headed stepchild over, stuck between Washington and California for so long, where it just didn't matter. We had our one Republican, you had Walden in there for 20 years, in Congress, and that was the 1R, and the rest just didn't matter. And they were all blue, and here's our electoral votes, have at them. And the deep presidential candidates would maybe swoop in for 2 hours and grab some money in Portland and move on to 3 or 4 events in California, but they wouldn't. It just was never on the radar. So anytime we get some of that national attention, you're right, it does. You're kind of like, oh, somebody cares.
Oregon matters, and not just to bash Portland
Yeah.
liberal policies. Oh, nice. Well, speaking of places where you have to do polling in Oregon, it's all over the state. And we had John Horovic from DHM Research, and he was talking about the poll that they were doing for June. And they had to do some work to get it ready. It is out now. And I don't know if you read through all this, Brian, but if you didn't, I was going to ask you some questions. Not really ask you some questions. I'm going to read you some stuff from the poll and then have you react to the numbers. Tell me what you think.
Yeah, do that. I have not had a chance to get through the whole thing yet, because it's pretty intense poll, and John does a great job with polling, and maybe one of these days I should hire him to do some polling.
I get the sense that their firm is going to be expensive because they do a lot of polling for big corporations and
petitions
nonprofits
and stuff. Yeah, I don't think they like her. I'm like, can you drop a 0 off that poll, John? I mean, I like the 4-digit polls.
We can talk about another poll here next, done by a different pollster, a little more Republican friendly and a little more inside our budgets, Brian.
Yeah, we will.
The Hoffman Research Group. John's poll here, DHM, conducted, so baselines here, 500 respondents, margin of error 4.4%, conducted between June 18th and the 24th. So, the first question that really caught my eye here, right direction, wrong track. So, right direction, 31%, wrong track, 51%.
Well, that makes
Are
sense.
people happy, Brian?
No, I really don't
Not
think
happy.
people are excited about the direction of Oregon. I don't think that there's been, I mean, the national stuff always bleeds into that, right? Usually when you see the nation doing well, our right track, wrong track usually does a little better. But I think that people still in Oregon just don't feel like they're getting ahead. And I think that's where that wrong track, right track is. When people say, "What do you think Oregon's on the right track or the wrong track?" What they're not answering that question for the state of Oregon. They're answering it for themselves.
Right.
They're saying, "Is Oregon on the right track for me?" And I think that's really what, when you're polling, or at least that's my take on it, when you're polling, is people answer it as their situation. And I don't think people feel like they're on the right track. And I can tell you, I just got done spending a week on the coast with Senator Anderson doing town halls and stuff. People do not believe we're on the right track. And I'm
Mhm.
talking Democrat, Republican, independents, and all the flavors in between. It was very apparent, and it was all different flavors of why. It wasn't just economic. I mean, there was so many different reasons why. It was either the, crime, the local sheriffs aren't patrolling, the communities anymore because they don't have the money. It's all the things you can think of, right? And cost of housing, and all those sort of things, education. It was all the gambit, but definitely people don't believe we're on the right track.
Well, I can tell you the primary issue here is resounding. What do you think is the most important problem facing Oregon today? 49% said homelessness. The next closest, 17%, drugs, addiction, mental health, housing affordability, 16%. In some ways, these all three are sort of all connected, right? And then finally you get to cost of living at 10%, crime, 9%, economy, jobs, 5%. Poor leadership, government mismanagement, 4%, taxes, 4%. Of note, immigration and illegal immigration at 2%, abortion at 1%.
Hmm.
Honestly, with these, I would like to stop asking about homelessness and find out what people's second most important issue is. It's clear we need to tackle the homelessness thing. And you saw this last week, I think, in California, Gavin Newsom was like, he's done. Executive orders. I want to put a disclaimer here. I think Gavin Newsom helped cause a lot of this problem, and it's become a political liability now that
Absolutely.
he is trying to become the vice president or a future president. Kamala stole his chance, so he's pretty mad about it. So he's trying to get himself back in the running here, I guess. And so he did an executive order saying that local law enforcement can clean up, certain kinds of homeless encampments. And I think that there's a lot of worry, obviously, that that's going to make its way up I-5 to Oregon here as they clear those out. So that 49% could be a low number, Brian, if things start to get worse.
It, yeah, it's another thing I saw on the coast when I was over there, is especially from years past since I've been over there, it's gotten noticeably worse. There's no doubt that every community, rural community, small community, I was going home. I was in Prineville last night, driving home. I had to stop by a little grocery store, and there was three people hanging out on a bench out there, and they looked like they're literally camping, because they had all their crap, strewn about themselves. And I haven't seen the homeless stuff really hit Prineville at all, but it's here now, and they're not from here. I mean, I know the resident homeless people that I've seen for years in downtown, and these aren't them. So they're transients, and to your point, they're coming from somewhere. And I think that's everybody's fear. And the problem, and this is where I do agree with Democrats on this problem, is that police only can disperse homeless people.
Right.
They're not going to solve the problem. And I think that I think the Democrats have the right mentality in regards to where you can't just, even though I think, we should just give them bus tickets, but I think that's the Republican mentality, or at least mine. I don't think it's all of them, but I think the Democrats are right. Like, if you want to truly solve the problem, but how do you solve a problem that's exponentially increasing? So I don't think there's an amount of money that you can solve. And then you go, and then most of the metro areas are the ones that have all the services, all the wraparound services that they talk about. And then you go down to a community like Coos Bay. Well, they don't have all the services to be able to provide the wraparound services. So how do you get somebody that's mentally ill to a facility over in Eugene when you don't have a bus to take them there, or you don't have transportation to get them there? And then it's all the things, and I just don't know the solution to this, but I know what the result is in a year from now it'll be worse. That's the
I
reality.
think there was this is an idea that you and I had talked about. I think that we may see other elected officials. I was pitching it to another elected official. I think the fact that the state hospital isn't really the state mental hospital anymore is a problem. And I think, the reasons that they didn't want it to be the main state hospitals, they didn't want all the crazy people in Salem. And I understand that. But I think if that's going to be the solution, if it's going to be local, there's not going to be enough money in the local governments to build their own mental hospitals. So the state probably needs to take the lead on this and say, okay, it's time to build a new mental health hospital network, and we're going to build it throughout the state. Now, the unfortunate thing is the state's not very good at running big programs like this. So it would be nice if they could bring in a private partner to sort of help and point out what they're doing wrong. But there needs to be some sort of action here. And it's not going to be 30 or 60 days in the state hospital and then immediately released back to your community where there's no resources. And it's not going to be, we spend $200 million every couple of years to build these things and they take 5 years to build. And, there's so much red tape and stuff on this to where the problem stays so bad for so long. I would much rather eliminate a lot of the red tape and stuff and then find out what the problems are from that and get these things up running in 6, 8, 12, 24 months than wait 5 years because we didn't check all the boxes. It just makes me crazy sometimes.
No, I couldn't agree more with you. And I think that the state, and I think you hit on it a little bit there when you're just talking about the state's usually not good at tackling big problems, because it's same with our traffic stuff. They always take little bites at the apple. You know what I mean? Like they go in and they create one program where they think it might work for one little area of the state, and then it does, but then it gets overwhelmed and it just can't quite. Whereas a problem like this for homelessness, there has to be a two-prong attached. You have to have the wraparound services. I agree that that's kind of needed because there are some people that we can save. And even if it's 20% of that population, 15% of that population, it's worth it. People's lives are worth it. So we have to do that. And if you're a pro-life person, you have to say it is worth it to save that person's life from fentanyl and from a life of the death spiral. Basically, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. If they're in these drug dens and they're in these homeless dens and stuff. So we have to get people out of there. And that's where, my heart goes there and just says, it is worth it, right? I'm willing to spend more. I just want it to be effective. And I think
Right.
that's where we have that problem. And sometimes when the other side of the coin is the state can't do it. We agree. But also some of these private companies that they hire, these firms come in, I feel like sometimes they just rob us and they don't actually do it. I mean, look at some of these nonprofits are charging $2,500 a night for a freaking bed. That's highway robbery. So there's got to be some sort of middle ground where we can figure out the solution. I need to do some digging. You and I probably need to do some digging on what states are doing well with homelessness stuff and doing some things and really bring that to the Capitol, I think, this next year to really say, how about instead of trying to create our own solution, why don't we hodgepodge maybe a couple of different solutions that are working pretty well? and start doing, knowing this isn't going to be solved overnight. I think that's also, the Democrats and the Republicans to this point. I think all of us, when we take Measure 110, right? When we fix that in short session, like we just thought, well, we fixed it. It's all over now. Don't have to worry about that fentanyl thing, and we all everybody claps their hands and they shake hands and wow, it's bipartisan. And we didn't fix the problem. Like it's not done by any means. We've moved the needle, maybe. I don't even know if we've moved the needle. I guess slightly because it hasn't even gone into effect yet.
Right, September 1st. It's not recriminalized.
But it's so funny how we just move on, right? Like in our minds, like, oh, let's go to the next thing. It looks like transportation now. Let's get them roads going. And we're like, wait, what? We're not done yet. And I think that's with homelessness is, I think we did a few things in the last long session, right, with the governor's bill and a bunch of stuff for shelter funding and some other things, and then we just assume it's done. And that's a problem. That is a fatal flaw of politicians, because we want to take the credit, for something before it's actually been solved. And we rush to the microphone to say, great, we're spending $100 million on this thing. Consider it done. Now vote for me for re-election.
If you've ever seen, and I think you've seen this movie, Brian, Charlie Wilson's War.
Yes.
They go to all this effort to talk about this war that they can fund, and they start, sweeping accounts and giving money to the CIA for all of this stuff, and everyone's slapping each other on the back. We did such a great job. And then as soon as the war part is over, no one is interested in funding, cleanup, next steps, all that stuff. Everybody forgets about it. And it's the same thing. We put together these big packages and whatever, and then, wow, check the box. We fixed it. We're moving on. And part of that's a limited attention span, especially at the legislature. We only have this certain amount of time to deal with issues. So once we've tackled one, it's like, let's move on to another one. But the follow-up, is there going to be follow-up on that? There should be in the 25 session, and who's going to bring the follow-up?
Yeah. I agree.
All right, so now we got to the favorability section. I'm going to read you 4 names, and you're going to have to tell me who you think has the highest positive favorability rating. And this isn't going to be as easy as you think, Brian. Is it Joe Biden before he dropped out, Kamala Harris before she became the presidential nominee, Donald Trump, I think this was after he was shot, Tina Kotek? Those 4. Who has the highest positive favorable?
Well, I think the Republicans tend to be unified behind Trump, so I'm gonna go with Trump.
Yeah, he's last at 29% positive.
Dang it.
68% net negative. Next up was Kamala Harris, 34% positive, 51 negative. Then Tina Kotek, 35% negative, 42%. I'm sorry, 35% positive, 42% negative. And Joe Biden, the most liked of all 4, still has a net negative. He 41% positive, 56% negative. People don't like their elected officials in Oregon. We're grumpy, but wrong track's very high.
Yeah, when you're in the wrong track, you're going to blame the person at the top, and I still think, Kotek has still got some Brown hangover. I still believe that's carried over there, but at some point it's her hangover, right? I mean, at some point her agencies have been failing her as governor. I mean, I think that those agencies people reflect agencies and their response to how the governor's doing. It's just the reality of it. And I think if there's a wildfire, it's the governor's fault. It's just that's just the way the world works, right? Same way if there's a war, if the economy's bad, it's the president's fault. So they have to wear the good with the bad, and right now they're wearing the bad. And I think that's just the reality of it. If I was governor, I would be doing more appearances, more press conferences, more conversations, more things to show that I'm trying to do something. Because I think people respect somebody who's trying to do something. And I think that's where the Biden-Harris stuff is just, and of course, people obviously don't like what Trump's trying to do. But I think with Biden-Harris, that's part of the problem is we're seeing the things that they're doing of forgiving loan student loan debt and some of those things, is that's not helping the situation. Trying to get interest rates lower so people can buy a house is doing something. Like there has to be, you got to show that you're out there trying to do something to make a difference. And during COVID, I think even Donald Trump and Biden both had decent numbers because they were out there throwing money at the problem, trying to show that they were doing something, and they had some pretty high numbers. And now it doesn't feel like, and I even feel this way, I don't feel like they're really doing anything. Like, what do you really do? What has Congress done? How many bills has Congress even passed this year?
They can't. I mean, there's just so much gridlock there
Yeah.
between the two chambers being controlled by different parties. And Biden, instead of, I think this is sort of the problem and why Biden didn't have the cachet to continue to run. It's not just because of the challenges, obviously, with him presenting as not being fit for the job physically. He didn't turn himself into that Bill Clinton, I'm going to be the moderate guy who's taking issues from the right and the left and then just solving them, right? Because you sort of take you sort of take both parties hostage as president when you do that, when you say, we're going to fix this problem that you've been crying about for a long time. Because now when they don't try to fix the problem, they look like the bad guys. And same thing if you tell the far left, we're done with your stuff. We're going to do, more moderate Democrat stuff. I mean, he would have been in a much stronger position to hold on to his reelection, I think, if he were running as a moderate president solving issues. But he let the far left of his party control his White House, whether intentionally or not.
Yeah.
Here's one that'll be interesting to you, Bryan. In Oregon specifically, would you say illegal immigration is a problem or not a problem? 47% say it's either very serious or somewhat a problem. 46% only a small problem or not a problem. So only 18% say it's not a problem at all. Everybody else says it's somewhat of a problem on various level of seriousness. And I think not to toot our own horns too much, but we did go to the border and gather information, learn more about how it affects Arizona, and we're able to share that more. Republican candidates are sharing that with their constituents, and I think if half of the state thinks it's a problem, that was worth doing.
Do we see how that compares at all with like Arizona and Texas, and I wonder where we are on the spectrum of the state. So while you do your Google machine,
Yeah,
because you're really fast at it than me, your hands work faster. I think it's because you're born with a smartphone in your hand, or at least a computer, not a smart. You weren't smartphone generation.
I was raised on regular old computers using Windows 95, Bryan.
You can pound a keyboard faster than a smartphone. Like my kids, your kids they're going to be super quick on smartphones. I definitely, by region too, I would think that people in Portland in general probably don't necessarily think it's a problem as much as people in other areas of the state. I think there's a general difference between rural and urban on this one. But that 47% that we're divided, it's pretty interesting. You could probably go back a couple of years and people probably did, in 2019, they probably didn't think it was a problem at all. Heck, they were probably asking for more in the ag world. We were asking for more workers, more HB1 visas, more this, more that, to come across the border and help us. But it's not, I think I would love them to go a little bit deeper on this question, because it's not that illegal aliens are the problem. It's what I'm worried about is what they saw today, right? A Palestinian terrorist detained at the border. Like, that's what we're worried about coming across the border. I don't think anybody's worried about, we've always had illegal Mexican, South American citizens kind of filtering through the border, right? That's been a thing. It just hasn't been it's really the other stuff. When you start seeing Chinese, Indian, all Russians, all the men of fighting age coming through the border, and terrorists obviously coming through the border, that's a problem. I mean, that's where we start wondering about our security. That's when it becomes a problem. And if you can't have a secure borders, you're not a nation. We got to have secure borders. And I think that's just and I think that's where most Oregonians are at. I think even if you drill deeper, you could probably get a lot of those people that don't think it's a problem. If you said, is it a problem that men of fighting age coming from Palestine bent on, and they're on the known terrorist watch list crossing the border. Is that a problem? I think the answer would be pretty high. And if that's 80-20 and you're in the 20% world of that, then you're probably at a Hamas protest.
So this think tank, the Center for the Future of Arizona, actually they don't call themselves a think tank. They say they're a do tank. So they're not here to just think, which, I appreciate. They did a survey that showed 89% of Arizona voters believe immigration reform is important to our country and to our economy. So I would say in
Wow.
Arizona, it's an issue for almost every voter, whereas in Oregon, about half, which sounds right to me. We're further from the border, obviously. It's not maybe obvious to every person that the drugs may be coming over the border necessarily. Maybe everyone just thinks they're coming from California, and in some ways they're right. California and Arizona is where it's coming from before or after it gets through the border, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
maybe but I think that's an interesting way to contrast those.
Or the northern border. I don't know about all the listeners out there, but I've been driving around the state. I mean, I was literally up and down the coastline in Medford and then drove back to Prineville. I have seen more people from freaking Canada in Oregon this summer than I think I've ever seen before. The amount of British Columbia and Calgary like license plates and Manitoba and all these provinces, it's insane the amount is it. And then they don't know how to drive. They drive like 45 miles an hour over the pass because I'm sure they're gaping at all the cool things to look at, and all I want to do is get home. But it's
Brian, it's because they're scared because they know Oregon doesn't have universal health care, so if they get in a crash, they're worried it's going to bankrupt them.
right. They're so used. They're like, oh, the DMV. Yeah, that's what it's like when we go to the emergency room in Canada. You sit there forever and you take a number.
All right. The next question, and this one was fascinating. So they asked, how would you give the following aspects of K-12 education, public systems in Oregon, a grade? So they asked them, because, it's an education question. Grade A, B, C, D, F. Don't know. Okay. So now I'm doing quick math because they asked it about your local public schools. And then they also asked it about schools in the state, like Oregon's public schools generally. And so add one more number. So here we go. C and below for your local public school, 70% of voters gave a C or below. C was the most common answer, 34%. Only 30%, or 6% gave an A, 24% gave a B. And that's your local public schools. So that's all the teachers you like or don't like. That's your kids' schools, the schools your neighbors go to, all that. Oregon's public schools, shockingly, do worse. Only 3% gave an A. The total at C or below, 80%. They even calculate a GPA. What's the GPA based on this? A 2.0 GPA for local public schools and a 1.8 for Oregon's public schools overall. That is tremendously bad, and I think presents a real opportunity for Republicans. I'm not sure that we found the exact right message, though, yet on fixing education. I think that's sort of the challenge here. I know a lot of people, school choice, and obviously that's good, but I think that we still have to be the party of fixing public schools because a lot of people aren't going to figure out what the charter system is or the right charter, or they just want their kid to go to the school they went to when they were growing up. Whatever the reason, we have to still be for fixing the traditional public schools.
Well, I'm not going to, I wouldn't disagree with that at all. I think you have to have a great public school system. Our public schools, I want them competing with the private school system. I want them rivaling the private school system. I can't even say that word, but it's super important. And not only in Portland, where you could send your kids to a private school, in Lynn County, they got a couple of private schools. We don't really have them in Crook County. We don't have that, they don't have them over there in Burns. They don't have them in coastal areas and in the rural parts of the state. So I need our public schools to be in good shape. And quite frankly, our public schools should be in good shape. There's something to going to a big 6A school and playing 6A football and all the things. You go to a private school, you're playing 1A and You want to be on the basketball team? Well, it's like, yeah, did you show up? Great. Here's your varsity jersey. Like, it's not the same. Whereas public school, you're just it's just a different world, right? And I went to public school, and I think a lot of kids go to public school, they turn out just fine. But I think you're right with the Republicans. We're missing the boat on this one. They do need more funding. I'm in favor of more funding for our public education. I think where we have to be is, but it needs to go to the classroom. I want to pay good teachers well. I think a good teacher can make or break a kid desire on how they educate their future with themselves from junior high through high school. A good teacher, and I know with my own kids, Reagan, and you'll see it as your kids kind of get older, but if they have a good high school teacher with two boys, one just graduated, one 16, so he's going to be a junior, I know who their good teachers are. I know the teachers that Britt comes home and says, Dad, guess who? He just told me this the other day. Guess who I got for peer tutoring, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, oh, I got Mrs. Kurtz. She's the best, and blah. It's not because she does things for free. It's because she's a good freaking teacher. And I think that's what parents want. We want to send our kids to a public school, and I think parents, in the absence of, wanting to throw some money into a private school, I think most of us that are maybe on that edge of could afford a private school or not afford a private school, if we felt public school was good, we'd just send our kids to public school. Why wouldn't you?
Right. Totally. So now, one of the things we talked about related to schools with John specifically was smartphone policy. And they asked 4 options for high school and same options for middle school. Should you not be allowed to bring it in school buildings at all? Turn it in while they're in school to like the office or something like that. Bring it to school but not use, or use it but not during class, or use smartphones at all times. In high school, 41% of people said they should be allowed to use smartphones, just not in class, which I hate to break it to everybody because we all like shiny new policy. Any teacher or principal can do this today. They can say no smartphones allowed in class.
Yes. And we shouldn't be legislating whether or not you're using a smartphone. All of a sudden we're having ORS on smartphones in schools. I mean, they have every school district has a phone policy. It's already there. What I really liked about this one, Reagan, is don't you feel like there was a distraction trying to be happening by the Democrats, that they were moving into this smartphone tablet play as some sort of distraction, like, oh, there's this great issue that we could get behind that most people are for, when the reality is most people are for the policy that exists today.
It was one of those things that polls at like 70% or whatever, just sort of when you ask it, without this nuisance. And people were hopping on it, and you can't really blame politicians for hopping on a hot issue, but I think it's really faded quite a bit since we talked about it like a month ago. Seems like it's not, and I think it's because now people are asking the questions and they're getting this result back, and they're going, oh, parents, And here's the thing: it's like the situations where we regulate smartphones are where in cars, where I'm going to get injured if somebody's using their smartphone and being an idiot, right? And I can't control their behavior. In school, and someone's using their smartphone, the worst result really is that they're going to be dumb if they're not paying attention to any of their classes. And that doesn't really impact me as much, and it doesn't threaten my life. Whereas with cars, I can sort of understand we're going to regulate that you shouldn't be using your phone in the car because it can lead to an accident. Okay.
Well,
totally different.
We have no texting while you're driving. What we don't have is enforcement.
Yeah, it's
there's
secondary.
There's zero enforcement on that. We don't have the police to do it. They got homeless camps they have to go break up. They don't have the time to go do text. And there used to be federal grants for all that. Remember when it was the no texting when you're driving? There was a bunch of that they used to do that was similar to, like the drinking and driving grants that the municipalities would get stuff. I did find it interesting though, looking at this polling, that once you get into middle school, it definitely moves a little more towards not having, or just basically turning more of the smartphones off. And I think everybody kind of agrees that the younger you are, it's probably better that you crack a book and learn how to turn a page than how to swipe right or left or up or down on your smartphone. And I think that's probably just a general understanding. And what I read out of this poll is like, hey, guess what? Democrats and Republicans agree.
Yep.
That's what I read when I read this. I think we're all on the same side of this one. I just don't think we need to legislate it. I think it's going to work itself out with school policies and hopefully good local school board members that just figure out a better way to enforce their ability to do the work now.
Yep. Well, that's about it. There was 2 questions. Do you think population decline in Oregon is good or bad? 47% say neither. 25% say it's good. 20% bad. And then people are having fewer children in Oregon. Do you think that's good or bad or not? Neither. 41% say neither. 32% say good. 21% say bad. So generally, more people say population decline and fewer children are good. These are the get off my lawn people. And then most people are like, I don't know how that affects me.
Isn't this this is very apropos to the JD Vance stuff that's been, circulating the last 3 or 4 days, right? With his comments about the nuclear family and the left's attack on the nuclear family and Kamala Harris not having kids and things like that. Even though she's been a stepmom, I don't think that that's really a fair attack on Kamala Harris either, because but I just find it interesting that John's got into this, starting to ask people that have kids at home, how do they feel? And I think he's trying to figure out, is there a nuanced difference between people that don't have kids in the house and people that do? And it's definitely a new constituency. And JD Vance is hitting into it, saying, if you're pro-family, do you believe a certain way versus other people that don't have kids?
Totally true. I should have put a teaser at the front of this, Brian, and maybe I'll record one because I want to get people excited. But we have some brand new statewide polling from Oregon. I was able to get my hands on this in advance, so we're waiting to publish this episode until it's out there. But a statewide poll conducted July 24th through the 26th by the Hoffman Research Group. 700 people. So this last poll we looked at statewide was 500. This is 700. Lower margin of error, 3.7%. And they asked the question that I was hoping to know, which was Trump and Harris. So, drum roll, please. I'm not going to insert a drum roll here, actually. Unless there's one built into GarageBand, then I might.
Might be. Insert sound.
Might be. So, if the general election for president of the United States were held today, and the candidates were Donald Trump, Kamala Harris, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., or Jill Stein from the Green Party, who I think is going to be on the Oregon ballot, who would you vote for? Kamala Harris gets 45%, Trump gets 40%, RFK gets 7%, Jill Stein gets 1%. Wow.
Yeah.
And if you eliminate the other 2 candidates and you just do Trump Harris, 49-44 with 7% undecided. That's close, Brian. It's closer than it should be.
Yeah, I think so. I think that obviously 49%, you're getting to about that 50% delta for Harris. So it's going to be hard. You'd have to take votes away from her at that point. But a 5-point spread for Trump is not bad in Oregon. You got to feel pretty good about that he's starting at basically where Drazen finished, on the governor's race. So he's starting where her $22 million got her to finish at. So I think that that's a pretty decent number for Trump. I think if you're the Trump team, you're pretty happy. I thought the difference between the Kennedy numbers was interesting. If he makes the ballot, I think that gives, because Trump loses a little bit to Kennedy, and it looks like Harris does as well. But it does, if he doesn't make the ballot, that tells me that there could be, I don't know, I think I'd want him in the ballot if I'm looking at this, because I feel that there's a little bit more room to play with. When you at 49-44, you're only looking at 7% to play with. So there's not, and they're probably decided at that Trump Harris. I can't imagine that they just didn't want to say to the pollster, if that's 700 people, 7% undecided, that'd be, help me do the road. What is it? 30 people said they're undecided. So I would look at those cross sections and assume that probably, okay, I'll say 4% of those 7 are decided, and they either don't want to say they're voting for Harris or Trump. But if they did go for Trump, imagine that he breaks 4%, it's 48, 49. That would be very interesting.
Now, I think this is the thing that's going to get us lit up the most on texts, honestly, Brian, of people listening and then texting us about. Do I think that this means Donald Trump is going to win Oregon? No, I do not. Because I think there's all kinds of other states where if Oregon's only at 5%, they were early on when Biden's numbers were really creating. They were talking about Virginia. They were talking about New Jersey. They were talking about New York. There are other states where there's more infrastructure, better established, and more electoral votes for him to go after. I think he'd have to put serious money in to winning Oregon and serious infrastructure. And even then, I think it would be hard. Okay. What I'm looking at, and even if this poll's an outlier, some polls you get a result and it's just an outlier. All the pollsters say you should still publish all the outlier polls. Doesn't make them necessarily wrong. Maybe it's on a different end. It's really all about the turnout model, who shows up in the election, right? But if it's true that Trump is overperforming where he was before, this is a 5-point gap. He lost Oregon by 16 points in 2020, 56-40. Even if he halves that margin to 8 or 9 points, that is a big deal for Laura Chavez Dreamer, for Mike Erickson, for Monique Despain, and Republicans down ballot. If Trump stops being a massive anchor and starts being a benefit or erases some of that margin, I mean, that's a handful of legislative seats that can swing if more people show up for Trump, if he's a little more popular in Oregon than he was 4 years ago. And I think that's where this could get interesting and where the impact is. No, I don't think Donald Trump can win Oregon. We may still title this episode, Can Trump Win Oregon? New poll shows Trump close in Oregon. I don't know. Because we want people to listen, but I want our analysis to be right here.
I think, in 2020, there definitely was some hatred towards Trump. 2016, though, I would say, I'm looking into the recent presidential elections. 2016, 50.1% went to Hillary, 39.1% for Trump. 2012 and 2008 don't matter because that was Obama years, is 54, 56.
Well, that's 16. That 2016, that's 10 points. That's better. We did better that year in 16 than we did in 20.
There was a huge.
That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah, there was a huge third-party candidate in 2016. Who was that in 2016? I was trying to look to see because there was a big margin that went to the middle of that one. But if you go back to Bush in 2004, and this is why when I was working on that campaign in 2004, this is why Bush came to Oregon, 47.2 to 51.4. And then in 2000, he nearly won the state for the first time since 84, 47 to 46.5. So that tells you that Al Gore, because really, if you look 47, 46, that really meant that there wasn't a lot of excitement for either one of those guys, to be honest with you. I mean, that's probably what that shows to me versus like where Obama was getting the 56, 54s, right? So I think there just wasn't a lot of excitement, and that could be the case this time. Is that they stay depressed? Robert Kennedy comes in, takes a little bit more of the bite of the apple there, and Trump could eke something out. I mean, because I think Trump's floor is stronger than Harris's floor. Just in the enthusiasm gap right now, and that could change, but. And you're right. I think the down ballot stuff is really where it matters. It matters in those congressional races because they're usually tied closer to the federal stuff than we are in the state house and the state senate stuff. But those guys are watching this stuff a lot, and I would imagine they want to take a look at this poll. Well, how'd they do in my counties? How'd they do? And I'm sure they got their own internal polling where they're looking at. And I've seen some polling, and I'll put this one out there. I've done polling in Deschutes County, where I'm seeing the gap, which was 18 in 2020, right?
I think that's right.
Yeah, 18 he lost in Deschutes County. Well, we're only showing that gap. Of course, it was a Biden gap, not a Harris gap, but it was only 9 or 10 points. So it's tightening a lot more. We're in an area like Deschutes County that decidedly didn't like Trump in 2020. So I'd imagine like in Lynn County, that numbers that they voted for Trump, I bet that's wider, right? So there's the difference. So that's really going to make a difference and it'll come down to turnout. I think at the end of the day, are the Democrats going to be excited about Harris enough to show up at a 90 percentile clip, or will the Republicans? And that's this is going to be that game.
And they're excited right now. Obviously, you see it on social media, but we're still, congratulations, by the way, Bryan, 100 days to the election today as we record.
Whoop, whoop.
But can they sustain that for 100 days? There's going to be a bunch of other stuff that happens in the cycle. Can Kamala Harris not say anything silly between now and then? I have real questions. And Bryan, it leads us into really our last bullet point for this episode, which is everyone was comparing the situation with Biden dropping out and the vice president running, which is a real plot line from Veep about a female vice president who gets thrust into the presidential race. And it just reminds me, local and state and even federal governments sometimes is Veep and Parks and Rec way more than it's House of Cards and West Wing. Those are fun. Those are fun shows to watch. 100% fiction. The stuff on Parks and Rec and Veep, that stuff is real. People being insane and crazy and completely weird. And we have some headlines that just like literally show you what that is like in real life.
Yeah, it really is. Whoever the writers were, I feel like the writers on Veep, I don't know if we're just seeing fiction become reality or what have you, but it's a great show if you guys haven't gone out there and watched it, especially if you've gotten into politics recently, to go back and watch that or to watch House of Cards from being an insider. There's some people that I think spoke to a lot of people inside the circles and said, oh, you want to see some crazy stuff, you got to see what really happens in these circles. We came close. One of the things before I get to the headlines, I just because I love to digress, we looked at filming and doing a whole recording session of the 2022 election cycle. So Senator Knopp and I had some long discussions. We're thinking, how much would it cost to follow all of our campaigns around? And just because you don't know what, you're doing it because you don't know what if, right? Like what could happen. And it would have, we realized at the end of the day, we didn't want to waste the money on, pretty much doing a documentary for our own edifice, so we're looking for funders out there that want to do it at some point. So if any budding filmmakers that have a lot of money, give us a call, Mike Erickson, and we'll go ahead and talk about that. But so here's a couple of headlines, and I'd love to get your take on these, Reagan, when we talk about the local stuff, because I just love it. Recall in Morrow County fails. And then so this is our friends at OPB again. They wrote a vote means the county will not have to completely replace its commissioners for the second time in 3 years, which is just nuts. So there's a group there just keep continuing to try to recall the commissioners. And right now it has to do with Amazon and the data centers, and they don't think they would they're getting a fair shake out of it. So they're like, and if they disagree, they're like, recall. And then so they just go right to the recall. The second time in 3 years. We've talked about it before, is the Baker City Council at one point had 0 counselors because they all quit and didn't have a mayor. So they've had to go through a whole weird appointment process over the craziness that's out there. And I think we've seen some other stuff, and Morrow County, I think, has always been a unique situation in this one. Their neighbors, Wasco County, the Dalles have had some recall efforts as well in that area, tied to the data centers, I think, with taxing and stuff. Cottage Grove, this headline's a great one. A push to recall 3 Cottage Grove city councilors got enough signatures this time to reach the ballot. So this is the second attempt to recall these poor city councilors who do this for free and probably ran unopposed. They get on, they go run and then they're part of it. And, a group says, you guys suck. So we're going to recall you over bullying and all these sort of things, which is just hilarious. And then
Well,
the last
and
one I have,
homelessness on that one too.
and homelessness. Yeah. The last one I have is letter threatens to expose the Brownsville councilor and mayor incident, which apparently the incident had to do with some bullying and some peeing on the streets outside of a bar. I love these. I could sit here and read these headlines. Reagan, if we had more time, we would literally have a website. And I'm sure we're missing some. So people got to keep emailing us your local city councilor or shit show
Yes.
that's going on.
Please text Brian or I if you have our numbers. If you don't, talk to someone who's cooler than you who does. And ask and send us these, because this would be great. I would love this. Should just be a reoccurring segment on Crosstabs. Parks and Rec style things. And here's the thing: there's a storyline in Parks and Rec. Spoiler alert, but it's been on forever, so I don't really feel bad. Leslie Knope is the deputy director of Parks and Rec. She decides she wants to run for city council because she cares so much about making Pawnee better. She wins. She gets recalled over something silly and loses the recall vote. And so, like, the stuff that happens there, like, a lot of these local elected folks are people who just really care enough to run. They're getting paid very little most of the time, right? Only in like county commission do you really even make a competitive salary, maybe, and they're getting recalled. Now, I will say, we looked at all that polling. Wrong track is a very high number right now, so people are pissed. So signing a recall petition is it's not that difficult probably to get one started and find a reason. Recalling city councilors in Cottage Grove over homelessness, it was 49% of people said it was an issue. It hasn't been solved. So part of this is fixing the issues people care about, right? I think that's part of it. But I think a lot of it is people are just so mad and they don't know what to do with that because they don't know how to get their politicians to solve the issues, and they think, hey, maybe if I try to recall them, they're going to pay attention, and they will. You'll get their attention, but is that actually going to solve the problem? And I think in a lot of cases, it's probably not necessarily going to solve the problem. Certainly, there are problem elected officials. We need the recall for them. Are these the answers? Probably not.
No, it's not the answer, but it sure is funny.
Oh,
the Brownsville one, I just got to
so
say,
funny.
so they,
Yeah, read this.
because and also we'll credit the Albany Democrat Herald for the story because it's just funny. So they got in a fight at a bar, right, just over political discussion, right? So they're calling each other names, the whole 9 yards. So somebody calls the Lynn County sheriff, and the report from the deputy describes all parties as intoxicated, with the Solbergs visibly swaying and slurring their words. Like, I think we all know that. And the deputy cautioned that they should, if the acrimony continued, the behavior could be charged as harassment. And so, like, it's so funny. They're arguing at a bar and they have to call the sheriff. Like, what are you going to call the sheriff's office about that you're arguing that your side's right or the other side, and you call the sheriff? I mean, I just love that. It's so funny that they're sitting there in Brownsville at a bar having a political argument that had them call the sheriff.
But wait, there's more, Brian. There's incidents involving a store called Hex, a witchy themed shop on Main Street.
Yeah.
And a sentence that begins on July 22nd, Andrew Hunt, a Brownsville resident known around town as the guy who wears kilts, was out for a midnight stroll. I just can't even. We've got a midnight strolling kilt guy, a witch shop. This has all of the Parks and Rec and Veep writers could get together, come take all this content and write another show. They just could.
We may have to do a Crosstabs episode at this bar in Brownsville. We'll call our friend Sheriff Michelle Duncan in Lynn County, and ask for, we might need some police escort to do a show, and we'll have all the parties on, and Reagan, we will get to the solution. We need to find the answer to what's going on in the Brownsville City Council.
We need a round table on this, Bryan. Let people air a listening session where they can air their issues. Then we could have a forum where people can discuss the solutions, and finally a special election to elect the right people to solve these problems.
I wonder, is there a Lynn County Sheriff's Office in Brownsville, or do they have to do that one remotely? There's probably not.
That's a good question. They have an Albany and Lebanon one, but I do not know if they have a Brownsville office.
Probably have one way out in Sweet Home, huh? Because that's kind of the corner out there on the lake.
So. I should know. I feel bad that I don't know.
This is your hometown.
Sweet Home, not my hometown. Brownsville, not my hometown. I live near Albany. And my hometown is
County. I thought isn't everybody Lynn County?
Yeah, no, it's true. Last thing, Bryan, we have to cover this.
All right.
Mostly because I think it's important for us to say something when our party goes a little off the rails, don't you think, Bryan? To keep, if not only for the right reasons in terms of keeping our party on the right track and successful, but also to be honest with ourselves. We're not just here to criticize the Democrats. We're going to criticize Republicans when they make a mistake. So I'm going to read this headline, then you tell me, just let you know, not thumbs up or thumbs down, but you can say, oh, that sounds great, or uh-oh, if it's not good. Despite denials, records show Oregon Republican Party trying to keep libertarians off the ballot. Seems like not good, Bryan.
Not good.
Not very
doesn't sound good from the get-go.
Yeah, so they sent a letter to the Secretary of State saying that basically the Libertarian Party, they've been arguing, and the party that says they're the real Libertarian Party isn't the real Libertarian Party, and there's actually a different real Libertarian Party. They sent that. Ben Morris, the Chief of Staff for Secretary of State Lavon Griffin Vlade, said they aren't treating the letter as a complaint to investigate, but as a request. And they said, if we get filings from libertarians, we're just going to check and see if we think they are candidates based on the law and then submit them, which seems like the right answer to me. Yeah. One of the entertaining things I read here, though, was when I think this is Julia Shumway. It is Julia Shumway. She reached out to the attorney who wrote this letter. So I'm going to read this to you. Tyler Smith, the attorney who sent the letter on behalf of the Republican Party, claimed he couldn't hear questions when reached by phone. He didn't respond to questions sent by email, and then a 3-sentence statement arrived from the PR person from the state party. I think that if Republicans are going to mess around, we should have a really strong legal basis for why the libertarians should not be on the ballot. But I mean, reading this, I'm seeing that there's confusion, but not a lot of like, this is exactly why none of these guys should be there based on state law. It seems like this is internal Libertarian Party business that they have to sort of get sorted out, but that if they submit candidates from their party, even if they're arguing about who's the real party or not, like,
yeah,
they should probably end up on the ballot, because libertarian voters, this is not their fault.
It's not, well, their fault that they're libertarian voters is their fault.
That's true. But it's not their fault that their party is acting just totally like libertarians would.
So there's a numerous number of minor party, minor parties that we have in Oregon. Every one of them is worthless, right? I mean, libertarians will have 20,000 voters statewide total. So that makes them the fourth, 20,409. I'm looking up. Look at me Googling. So it makes them the fourth largest actual party outside of Democrats and then Republicans, independent party, and then libertarians. The reason why Republicans care is I think that there's a general weird contention out there that if you get a third party in a race, Republican, Democrat, that maybe a libertarian takes votes away from Republicans. I don't prescribe to that theory. So I think that it's just not necessarily the case. I think Republicans shouldn't even be anywhere near these third party stuff going on. And if we are, we should definitely have a better phone so we can hear the questions from the reporter. Because that's the worst answer I've ever heard. Like, I didn't hear your question. Like, we'll ask it again. I know.
Can I call you back on a better connection real quick? No, he just decided to sit in the tunnel and
Yeah, right.
and not be able to understand
I'm in the
question.
tunnel between the zoo, stuck on traffic, and I can't hear you. Hang out. Yeah. What the? It's the worst. I mean, then that just makes you sound guilty, right? I mean, if you had nothing to do with it, just say, I got nothing to do with it. We got nothing. Or if you just say, yeah, we have a real problem with the way libertarians are conducting their business, and we want the Secretary of State to investigate. It's kind of cut and dry to me. I mean, it sounds very cut and dry. If you have a problem, now we shouldn't have a Libertarian Party or any party going off the rails, because you can get a minor party nomination. It's not that difficult. And I've seen in these little groups where it's usually whoever's the president or the chair, or vice chair, however they run their thing. They usually get together now via Zoom because they can't get enough people together in person to even get together. So most of them get together in Zoom, whether it's Green Party, Working Families, you name it. And they're like, hey, does anybody want to run? And they look around the room and nobody wants to run. And then like, oh, do we give our nod to a Republican or a Democrat? And I think, so there is a real problem with the process, I think. And I think we're okay questioning the process. And I think that's probably something for the next Secretary of State to take on and figure out. And because I don't see our current Secretary of State. I mean, she's just trying to make sure she keeps her purse going before she's done. So she's not going to work on anything or do any sort of meaningful work. Hopefully some staff inside there maybe they have a thought process, but there's a problem. But for Tyler to sit there and say, I can't hear your question, is silly.
It's kind of silly. And this was 2 weeks after there was another article about the libertarians being on the lookout for Republicans bussing in libertarians to their meeting, and it led to a pretty good quote from libertarians. I want to give them credit in this other article. If Republicans in Oregon put 1/10 of the effort they do into trying to manipulate elections and trying to play spy versus spy, like they're in an episode of West Wing or something like that, if they could just grow up and learn how to do serious campaign on serious issues and actually address the issues that matter to the people of Oregon, they could probably win an election. It's like pretty good quote.
Yeah.
Well, it cuts a little deep there for the people who are doing the silliness or involved with the silliness. I think that's exactly right. We need to focus on our message. We need to focus on making our message consistent, good for voters, and showing them that we can govern. And getting in a little tussle with the Libertarian Party, that isn't going to do it. It's not going to convince people we can govern, Brian.
No, I mean, get them underneath our tent and show them that we're the party that more aligns with, their basic tenets of freedom. And I think that's really, we disagree usually on abortion, and we disagree, in their drug policies and stuff like that. But I think they're with us on the Second Amendment. They're with us on a few other issues that, probably tax policy, smaller government, all those sort of things that I think are probably the bigger issues within the Libertarian Party that make people want to be a libertarian. So focus on the big stuff and get out of the weeds. And I agree 100% with their statement that we should not be meddling, that we should work more. But I will also say that so should the Democrats, because they do it just as bad as we do. And I think if we find an angle and we see a path to somehow carve out 2%, because our elections are super close here. I mean, that's the reality of it. They are super close. And if you find an edge, it's hard not to want to manipulate that edge if you can, just a little bit, to get yourself to victory. I mean, I have a hard time disagreeing with that either. But I think we should focus on winning first and the bigger.
And we could be cross-nominated by the Libertarian Party. I mean, that's the thing, is if a Republican candidate wants to go court Libertarian voters, win their nomination, they should do that, because that's what you're supposed to do. But a party on party, this kind of stuff, it just doesn't. it doesn't seem like a straight up attempt to win their voters. And like you said, if the Oregon Republican Party was like, we're going to welcome the Libertarian Party voters in because their leadership is a mess, you guys should come with us. Here's the things that we agree on. Here's candidates that share libertarian. If the Oregon Republican Party said, hey, let's do a mailer to libertarians throughout the state and say, here's Republicans with values that value liberty. That would be worth its weight in gold, honestly. I mean, that would be smart. That would be a great move.
Would be. I've seen some libertarian stuff, like they've been like the libertarian Republicans of, Kentucky and things like that, where they've been successful in like creating subsects of the overall grand old party. So you can do things like that effectively and successfully in other states. They've been able to do that, especially in those states like, the blue wall states over there. Kentucky, I've seen it there. West Virginia, that was kind of one of the things that got all West Virginia to go from a hard blue to, a hard R state is courting those sort of voters that care about those sort of issues that matter to Republicans on the grand scale, right? The 80%, 70% things where we get along. And that's where we need to focus on. And, of course, in the Libertarians, I think the party has been pretty even, I want to say, in kind of cross-party nominations. I know we're going to hit us on the last one, but I'm going to tee it up. We know one party that hasn't done anything with cross-party nominations. They're just the shill for the Democrat Party, and that's the Independent Party of Oregon, the worst small party that's out there in the state, and they're nothing but the Democrat Party called the Independent Party so they can curry voters.
You guys are on notice. We've got guests coming up that are ready to help us really break down how terrible the Independent Party of Oregon is. Well, with that, thank you for listening. If you want to follow Bryan Iverson as he learns politics for the first time, he's very new at it, as we said at the top of the program, at Bryan G. Iverson on Twitter. I'm at Reagan Canope on Twitter. You can go to crosstabs.studio. Make sure to rate and subscribe, of course, to Crosstabs on your preferred podcast platform. And you can follow us on Twitter at CrosstabsFM. Thanks for listening, everybody.